Bridging the Gap with Dr. Jacob Wilson.
What's up, everyone? I'm Dr. Jacob Wilson. I'm here with Charlie Ottinger for another episode of Bridging the Gap. Today we're going to talk about part two, basically, of training frequency. So we outlined the importance of training frequency in part one, but now we're going to give you a lot of tips and tricks on how to actually do it effectively. And we're going to answer the question, can you train a body part every single day? And will you grow? But before I actually get into that, there's some really, really great things going on here. Number one, we created a program for you. So that program essentially is a full body training program, and we create it, and we're going to give it to you free, for nothing, free of charge. All you got to do is head over to themusclephd.com. It'll prompt you on where to enter your information, your email, so that you can get that free program. So that's our gift to you. And the other thing is, guys, we're doing a lot of education. And Charlie and I and Fernando over there, we created a 30-week course. It's the most amazing course that you could possibly ever imagine as far as knowledge of gaining muscle, losing fat, getting stronger, periodization. So we're going to be giving you a quick preview from a clip from that course right now. Check it out.
Okay. So on this barbell right here, I found the competition rings. I'm going to put my shins almost right against those. I'm going to turn my toes out about 45 degrees. Okay. Then from here, I'm still talking about that tripod foot idea. I want my big toe on the ground. I want my little toe on the ground as well as my heel. But now I'm also pushing my feet towards the outside of my shoes because that's going to help engage my hips, open up my knees, and it helps me stay more upright in this position. Okay. So ultimately, try a conventional stance, try the sumo stance, see which one you feel better at. Ultimately, when it comes to bodybuilding or any other general fitness sport, you're probably going to want to use both. You want to get optimal development in both.
All right, we're back. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that clip. I hope that we can join you guys for that 30-week journey to just gaining the most amount of knowledge you could possibly imagine, and knowledge that will certainly change your life. So, Charlie, last time we talked about training frequency. What are three things in terms of what are some things that impact our ability to train frequently?
Yeah, so I think we'll kind of review what we did last time when we talked about this. And again, to really truly get all the information here, go back and watch that podcast if you haven't already. There's a ton of good information in that one. And it's going to make a lot more sense when we get into what we're talking about today. You'll have a good background understanding of that stuff.
Yes.
But traditionally we say you shouldn't train a body part every single day because you're sore. And when you're sore, odds are you have some sort of muscle damage and inflammation going on. And the result of that muscle damage and inflammation is reduced muscle activation and reduced force production or reduced strength. So when those two factors are in play, it's not really worth working out that sore muscle because you're not going to get that much out of your workout. And B, your injury risk could be higher too. So traditionally, we say training frequency is going to be dictated on how quickly a muscle can recover. Now, a lot of people citing poorly done analyses or review papers will say, oh, just train every muscle twice a week and you're done. Yeah, that probably works for a lot of people, but it's not the most optimal way. And so in the previous podcast, we talked about a more clever way to think about training frequency, and that was including factors that were unique to a muscle or unique to how you trained a muscle and how that would impact muscle damage and recovery. So what are some of those factors, Doc?
Well, we talked about basically some of the factors, the overall size of the muscle, for example. So if you think about it like larger muscles are harder to activate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so like the glutes, the pecs, right? The glutes would be hard to activate, whereas the pecs, are obviously not going to be as large as the glutes. Also, muscle fiber type for example, is going to be something that's going to impact training frequency and muscle damage. So, for example, if you have the calves, especially the calves are primarily slow twitch. Well, slower twitch muscle fibers don't seem to have as much muscle damage because they can't generate as much tension, and they don't create as much oxidative stress. So those muscles might recover faster, whereas muscles that are predominantly fast, they might not recover as fast because they generate more tension, more oxidative stress. And the other thing is going to be important is range of motion. So if you look again at things like the pecs, you have a really large range of motion, so you can have a lot of muscle damage. Whereas going back to the calves, you have very short, stubby little range of motion, you're not going to have as much muscle damage. So longer range of motion, more damage, more slow twitch muscle fiber, less damage, faster twitch, more damage, larger muscles, you can't activate the muscle as well, right? So you're going to have maybe less damage with that, and vice versa.
Yeah, so essentially we hinted on the last podcast about using essentially all these clues with every muscle group, and then kind of made some theoretical claims anyways about how frequently you could train each muscle group every week. And really, besides the pecs, you could probably train every muscle group at least 3, if not 4 times a week. But we left some Easter eggs in there and left that for this podcast to go over some of the clues on how to do that. Because again, you could still have some lasting fatigue or soreness or things like that when you're trying to train that muscle group more frequently, but we have some workarounds for that. So I figured what we could do is kind of like what we did with the last podcast. We're going to start from the ground up again, from the calves all the way to the traps, and talk about some secret ways to increase the training frequency for each muscle. So I figured, since calves are your favorite, you can start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Calves are my favorite. So basically, that's the only way I ever got my calves to grow was definitely training them pretty much every single day. Now, the thing is that people will often ask, well, okay, if I'm training my calves every day, so do I do standing calf raises every single day? What you're going to basically do is identify the fact that the calves might have different functions or different angles might impact the calves differently, and that's going to generate a different recovery stimulus. So, for example, if you look at the calves, that big, large muscle on the calves, it's called the gastrocnemius. And then you have that beautiful muscle coming out of the calves, that's the soleus. Kind of that V-shaped muscle, the diamond-looking muscle, that's the soleus. In front of the calves, you have the tibialis anterior, and then a bunch of supporting muscles therein. But basically, one thing we know is if we do standing calf raises, because the gastrocnemius crosses the knee joint, when we do standing calf raises or donkey calf raises, we're maximizing the tension basically in the gastrocnemius because you kind of pull the muscle taut, okay? If I sit down, okay, because it's crossing the knee joint, the muscle kind of gets less taut, okay? There's some slack in it, and so it doesn't contract as well or doesn't exert as much tension. So what does that mean? That now the soleus, which doesn't cross the knee joint, is going to bear more of the tension, more of the force. So what that basically means is that to build big calves, you got to build both those muscles. So today I could focus on standing exercises, and that's going to make my gastrocnemius sore. The next day I can do more seated, and that's going to place more emphasis on the soleus, okay? And I could alternate back and forth from there. But also, if I want to, you could go standing calf raises Monday, seated calf raises, type calf raises Tuesday, and Wednesday you could do the tibialis anterior if you wanted to, and then restart. And so train like that 6 days in a row, and maybe give yourself a day off, right? So any of your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's great.
Perfect, man. So that's kind of the calves, and we do recommend that if you want them to grow, you got to train them at least 4 to 6 days a week. What do you think about hamstrings?
Yeah, hamstrings are an area a lot of people struggle in, especially after playing sports. They're pretty quad dominant, all that good stuff. So I think one secret to training the hamstrings could be adding frequency for them. So kind of similar to the calves, we have some unique anatomy with the hamstrings in that there's 3 muscles of the hamstring, technically 4 muscle heads, because you have one's the biceps femoris, but of those 4 muscle heads, 3 of them are biarticulate, right? They cross both the knee and the hip, okay? Then you have the biceps femoris short head, which doesn't. It just crosses the knee. So we think about, again, we know range of motion is something that could dictate muscle damage. Anything that's involving movement at the hip with a straight knee, that could be RDLs, good mornings, stiff leg deadlifts. From the range of motion experienced alone in the hamstrings, that's probably going to increase recovery time because it's the most range of motion in this muscle group. However, if you do things like, especially lying leg curls, but seated leg curls to an extent, they're a little bit longer, but lying leg curls or prone leg curls, whatever you're gonna call that, those could be a good kind of stopgap for those in-between days, okay? So essentially what we're saying is alternate a hip-dominant hamstrings exercise with your knee-dominant hamstrings exercises to train the hamstrings more often. I think if you do this the right way, you could probably get away with training your hamstrings maybe 4 days a week. I would say throw in some kind of hip-dominant with either your leg day or your back day, and then keep the knee-dominant stuff more so maybe with your leg day. And I think you could do a workaround there where you can get 4 days a week out of your hamstrings and not necessarily, influence or impair performance on anything else. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great point. I think it's a really great point, too. And I think hamstrings are really, people don't focus enough on them.
No.
And that probably could lead to a lot of injuries. And also they look really good like on any side pose, right? if you're a bodybuilder. Now let's talk about the flip side of that, of the quads. And I think here's the thing, Charlie, and one thing that you've mentioned is that the quads recover faster than the hamstrings. So that's a problem. And one of the reasons why it's a problem is because typically when we're doing legs, we kind of train quads and hamstrings on the same day, right? Mm-hmm. But what we're basically saying is the quads might be able to be trained more frequently than even the hamstrings. So if we're going to do that, if I'm doing squats or if I'm doing, compound movements, I might be hitting the hamstrings and quads at the same time. Or if I'm doing lunges, my hamstrings might get sore. My quads might not get sore, but I'm training them at the same time. So the next day, my quads might not be sore at all, but my hamstrings might be sore. So how do I train my quads? Well, you could train them in isolation. So I think basically what we would recommend is throw in some leg extensions, throw in some isolation type movement, at least once to twice extra more a week to get your quads. You probably can train at least 4 or 5 days a week. Yeah. So throwing in some isolation days on quads are going to be super beneficial.
Mm-hmm. And I've even done like BFR for quads, blood flow restriction with like sled drags and stuff for days in between. Oh, that sucks.
That's brutal. That's horrible.
Yeah, I hated myself when I was doing those.
That is horrible.
But
man.
Another option for if in case you get bored with leg extensions, sissy squats, stuff like that, there's still ways to train your quads without impairing recovery in other muscles too.
So what we're talking a lot about, guys, is right now alternating different planes of movement, taking advantage of the different aspects of functionality of muscle groups, realizing that if you're going to increase frequency, you're going to have to use angles, planes, taking advantage of all these different functional components. If you're going to increase frequency, what we're saying is you don't want to train the muscle the same way every single day, and we're giving you in-depth tips of how to do that. Now, glutes are another one. Now they tend to not be activated very well, and they seem to recover fast, particularly with movements that target them, because they're more shortening-based movements. Like for example, hip thrusts, band movements. The exercise that you get the most activation out of the glutes are exercises that don't cause a ton of damage, okay? So based on that, if I want to increase my training frequency in my glutes, say I want to train 4 or 5 days a week, how would you recommend getting away with that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same story like we did with the quads. Like, we're not saying you should do squats and lunges 5 days a week because that'd be terrible. I wouldn't survive that.
Yeah.
But keep your maybe 2 days a week of squats, lunges, hack squats, stuff like that. But then for glutes and quads as well, you can add that isolation work throughout the rest of the week. So, with glutes, do your hip thrusts, your band exercises, your hip abductions, do all that stuff on another day other than your leg day if you're looking to increase frequency for your glutes. Because again, you can superset, as long as your gym's not that busy, you can superset those with pretty much any other exercise. It's not going to bother you. And it's increasing frequency for the glutes. You're getting a more consistent stimulus to train that muscle. And you're still working around recovery of the hamstrings, the adductors, the lower back, whatever else hurts from squatting or deadlifting. You can still keep working your glutes. And it's kind of the same way with the quads.
Right, exactly. And the next muscle group we want to cover too is the lats. So there's actually good research on this within a workout. So basically what happens is you guys know that the lats, for example, you can train them in a horizontal plane. For example, bent over rows, reverse rows, seated cable rows. But you can also train them in a vertical plane, which would be lat pull downs, pull ups, things of that nature. Now studies have actually shown that even within a workout, for example, you have more training volume if I alternate vertical plane movements with horizontal plane movements. I have more training volume because it shows that they're not fully training the same thing. Yes, they're both targeting the lats, but they're not fully training the same thing. So what that suggests to us is that if you're going to try and train your lats more frequently, maybe Monday I can focus on vertical movements, and Tuesday I can focus on horizontal movements, and alternating those back and forth. So I think that's a good tool for that. But I know one thing you have a concern about too is maybe overhitting your rear delts.
Yeah, so it is something. In the last frequency podcast, we didn't talk about shoulders. I guess we kind of lumped that in with back and pecs and everything else. But one thing to note with the shoulders is that they're probably a little bit faster twitch, but the rear delt isn't very good at lengthening contractions, essentially, eccentric contractions. It's, in a roundabout way, it's length tension curve. That muscle only shortens. So doing things like pull downs and rows and things like that probably can damage the rear delt a little more. And this is my N=1 experiment. I've done this method before of doing lats every day and alternating it. I've strained my rear delt so many times it's not even funny.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't recommend it.
So how do you get around that?
You just deal with it, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, you find it's funny because I normally would strain them doing like heavy rows or something like that. I can still do pull downs. So there might be some kind of unique neuromuscular compartment thing with the rear delt where pull downs are different from rows with it. So you can still usually do one or the other, but you can't deadlift at all.
Yeah.
That's what ruins my day the most.
And we've learned that we have to do that every single day. So there's more injuries.
Yep.
Like I can't do this exercise today, so I'm going to do this one.
Yep.
And then and I'll text them and go, oh, I tried wider stance squats today. My knees were okay.
Yep.
And then the next time, next time I go to wide stance squats, my knees are hurt. So yep. I'll switch it up. But that's out of necessity. But this is just saying, how to keep frequency going. Now, Charlie, I know with pecs, it's hard to train pecs as frequently. So do you think maybe you should let them recover?
Yeah, and that was one thing we talked about in the last podcast was that the pecs, we hit on the muscle fiber type, the activation ability essentially, and then the range of motion. The pecs are in the red for all three. And research shows that this is the slowest recovering muscle group. So I think I've torn my pec before. I'm sure you've had pec strains before.
Yeah.
Don't just train your pecs twice a week.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to push that anymore. But the one trick here though is that in a lot of our pushing exercises like bench, incline bench, stuff like that, you're also training your delts. Your front and lateral delts probably recover faster than your pecs. So you could add in isolation work for those, or maybe even overhead press stuff to an extent while your pecs are still recovering. I've had, again, I don't look like it, but I've had a little bit of success doing lateral raises every single day because it's just a shortening motion. There's nothing to recover from. I've never been sore from those, ever. So it's something to think about is if you're trying to bring up your shoulders, yeah, you're going to hit them pretty hard in your chest day or with your pressing day or whatever you want to call it. You can probably add isolation work, a couple days after that while your pecs are still recovering.
Smart. That's smart. So if we look at, like, if we talk about the biceps, again, remember kind of when you think about the biceps, or elbow flexors, really, you have the biceps and you have the brachialis, which is in between. And when you train the brachialis, it pushes the bicep upward and kind of gives it a more of a peak. And in fact, the brachialis could make up like a third of your arm. So that's that muscle that's wedged in between the triceps and the biceps. So we think about training the elbow flexors, the biceps and the brachialis, and also the brachioradialis is that forearm muscle that pops, nicely over the forearm.
Phil Heath. That's all we have to say.
Exactly, Phil Heath. And my favorite, the Myth, Sergio Oliva, right? And the Blonde Myth, Lee Priest. These guys had these massive brachioradialises, right? And so you can see what it adds to the arm. So when we think about elbow flexors, you want to make sure you're targeting the biceps, the brachialis, and the brachioradialis for that thick form moving into that 3D bicep with a huge peak. So to do that, you're going to want to take advantage of training your arms at different angles. When I'm supinated, I'm primarily training the biceps, okay? Maybe when I'm neutral, I'm training the brachialis and the biceps. When I'm pronated, I take a lot of the biceps out and I'm training the brachioradialis and the brachialis. So we recommend if you were gonna try and train your arms 5-6 days a week, do day 1 supinated, do day 2 neutral, do day 3 pronated. Maybe take a day off and come back around and repeat. Mm-hmm. You do that, guys, and like it's not just that your biceps are going to grow. Because think about it. When do you do reverse curls normally? At the end of your workout. Well, what if you did them fresh? So you will not only make your biceps grow, but you're going to start to get that 3D complete look. From all the way, every single angle, and so that's definitely a game changer for sure. Mm-hmm. So. What are your thoughts on anything else you want to add to that?
I think one thing, the people are probably going to think it's bro science and you can target one or the other, but this is something we actually get from physical therapy journals, which are oftentimes really helpful with stuff like this. The biceps and brachioradialis have this fancy relationship where they're called antagonist inhibitors or agonist inhibitors. Essentially, since the biceps insert on the ulna, which is the bone by your pinky, they are primarily, or not primarily, but they're a major supinator, right? They turn my pinky up. Well, in positions where my forearm is loaded, like I would be in hammer curls or reverse curls, where I'm pronated, that essentially inhibition signal comes from the brachioradialis to tell my brain not to activate the biceps in that position, because the biceps are a supinator, but we're trying to resist that supination. So it sounds like it's bro science, but it's not. This is legitimate. We're talking physical therapy. This is surgical information. Like, these are kind of the nervous system networks that a lot of non-strength and conditioning or bodybuilding journals go into. But it's stuff that we want to find out because that's how we really learn how to train. Right.
So Charlie's the only guy I know who reads physical therapy and journals to make you to grow and get bigger, right?
Yeah. We're doing the dirty work for you guys.
And it's a lot of dirty work, guys. That's digging deep, right? Because people mainly never even, you might have a guy, I'll read journal strength conditioning and research, but they're not digging deep into physical therapy, papers to actually see how they can make you grow. So, and then what about your thoughts on triceps? I know obviously the triceps are also partly a biarticular muscle.
Yeah. So with triceps, and it's actually a really cool study I just found the other day on this. This is our whole conversation with my one paper. So triceps, it's similar to biceps, but not entirely the same thing. So generally we lump tricep exercises into 3 different shoulder angles. You have like push downs where your shoulders are at, or your arms are at your sides. We have a shoulder angle 90 degrees, which is like, skull crushers and stuff like that. And then you could have overhead for overhead extensions, things like that.
Which is what I get the sorest on.
Oh, yes, right. Exactly. Because, and this is verified by MRI, a study I just found the other day, that in that overhead position, your tricep muscle is like 50% longer than it is in something like a push down.
Wow.
So that's why anytime you're doing overhead extensions, you're probably going to get more sore, more damage. So if you are alternating these angles, which I think you can to a degree, I would probably take a day off after you do your overhead extensions, just because you're going to be the most sore from that as well. But again, I think it's not a bad idea. My triceps, my elbows get crankier more than anything.
Yeah.
My muscles are ready to train, my elbows hurt. So biceps, I've had a lot of luck training essentially the system we just talked about, doing that every day. Triceps, not so much. I usually keep that more to 3 days a week, but I'm still alternating those shoulder angles as I go. So it's something to kind of try, see how you recover from, see if it competes with your pressing days, and then, see how it works for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, if you're going to train your triceps 3 days a week, maybe one day 0 degree angle, like he's pointed out, one day 90 degree, one day overhead. And you got to time that properly, obviously, with like your pressing movements. So, and of course, things like traps, you could just kind of add traps, probably. What would you say in between?
Yeah, I would say, because again, traps are going to be worked a lot with your rows and to an extent with pull downs and stuff like that. So, and again, traps recover fast because they're super slow twitch. So if your traps are a weak point, shrugs, upright rows, lateral raises to an extent, you can do a lot of that stuff, I think, in between your pulling or your back days, where you're getting the extra work in for the traps, but you're not, if you're not wanting to train the lats as often, that's a way you can isolate the traps, increase the frequency there, but you're not hammering your lats or your rear delts as much.
Yep. So the kind of the last topic we want to get into, and I think this is one of the most kind of craziest topics that there are, is when we think about training frequency, we think about it as a tool, to hit the muscle more frequently, but we're also thinking about it as a tool and a way to manipulate training volume. Generally speaking, when we're increasing frequency, we're obviously increasing overall volume on the muscle, and that's a way to make it grow. But can you manipulate, the question is, can we manipulate training frequency without manipulating training volume? And is that a tool by itself, independent of everything else, that can make you grow? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about now. So one of the old school studies that was done on this, and I want to say it was in the 80s, might have been 1988, was by this guy named Häkkinen. So Häkkinen took these, Häkkinen's out of Finland, and he took these elite powerlifters, and, weightlifters. And these weightlifters, obviously when you're elite, you're not making gains very fast in muscle or in strength. So what he did was he took their training volume and he divided it. So they did the same training days, okay? But they divided their training volume. Say they would, instead of training in the morning with a whole session, they take that same training volume and divide it into the morning and night. So let's say, for example, that let's say Fernando did 6 sets of squats this morning, okay? Then what this study would have had
typical Fernando thing to do.
Typical Fernando thing for So what Fernando would do instead was he would end up doing 3 sets of squats in the morning and 3 sets of squats at night. And what they basically found is that when you had the group of guys like Fernando who were just doing 6 sets of squats every day, and of course they're all elite, they didn't make many gains. We took that same group of elite people and they broke it up into 3 in the morning, 3 at night. They made gains in muscle size and massive gains in muscle strength and gains in power. You might not care about the last part, but they did. So, so the point is that this is saying he didn't change training volume. He divided the volume. And it's interesting because basically he found these big gains. there are other studies that have been done with untrained people, works with untrained people too, where they take untrained people and maybe they do 3 sets of arms, okay? And instead of doing 3 sets of arms once a week, they would do 1 set Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And with those untrained people, they actually also found better gains. So trained people, untrained people, it seemed to work similar. Now, if you move that out further, they did this study that was published, and this was all, they did this study in Norway. And it was at, I think, the Norwegian Institute of Sport. And it was probably back in 2013 or 14. Anyway, this lab out of Rostad's lab, they took powerlifters, Norwegian powerlifters, and a lot of the Norwegians are really strong guys. I got to train in some of their gyms back around that time, and they're monsters over there. It's like freezing cold. You can't go outside. So what better thing?
Might as well get huge.
Exactly. Hey, might as well get huge. You're not doing a lot of outside stuff. So anyway, these guys, they were training bench, squat, deadlift 3 times a week, which could, that's a frequency that a lot of powerlifters will use. They took that same training volume and they divided it up into the same volume, but into six sessions. So say that I was doing, 6 sets of bench, or 3 times a week. Now I would do 3 sets of bench 6 times a week. Same thing with squats. Same thing with deadlifts. And what was interesting is that when they broke their volume, same guys, when they broke their volume like that, their bench went up, their squat went up, their deadlift didn't. So maybe train deadlift every day is not, the best thing in the world to do.
Ecologically, it makes sense.
Ecologically, it sounds terrible. But these guys also got bigger quads and bigger pecs, right? So normally, if I were to, for example, like Charlie said, if I'm going to train pecs and I'm going to do 6 or 8 sets, I can't do that several times a week. But they basically just said, I'm going to take the same training volume and spread it out, okay? They got bigger. They got stronger. It's different. They didn't manipulate volume. They just said, I'm going to change training frequency. And this is kind of cool, guys. So it basically shows that training frequency by itself is a tool that can make you grow, so that we can institute this into our training in a certain way. So basically, it's basically just saying that whatever you're doing, this is a method. Say that you're at a plateau. You could take this method and you could look at your training volume, whatever your normal training volume is, and double your frequency, but keep the volume the same. And it's a method that can make you grow. Now, I've seen guys do, take individual body parts and do this. I've seen guys basically take it to extremes and go, oh, damn, I'm going to train full body 6 days a week. That's kind of, it ends up being it's being a lot, and maybe you can't dedicate the same amount of, well, what do you think? Do you think that you can dedicate the same amount of quality time doing a full body every day versus splitting it up?
It'd be hard.
Yeah, it would be hard.
You'd have to do it really, really smart.
Yeah.
And alternate exercises, planes of movement. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, you just have to be doing that on a daily basis with every single body part.
Yeah.
It take a lot of planning, a lot of thinking.
A lot of planning, a lot of thinking, and a lot of, I don't have a life.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Because this is going to be a long training session.
Yeah, it is.
Personally, like me, like if I do legs, man, do I want to train my upper body after that? If I do, I probably didn't train my legs.
Right.
So, but I will say this though, it's an interesting approach. It could work, but typically what I would recommend is picking a few body parts to do it on. Remember, guys, the point of periodization is that we have multiple goals. We can't accomplish all those goals at once. If you're focusing on too many things at once, I'm going to take advantage. I'm doing my full body every day. Maybe, but, you're probably not going to get the best gains as if you were to say, I'm going to focus on these body parts, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to think, all the things I will say, though, that we just went through on alternating body parts should apply here as well, okay? So you need to alternate planes of movement. You need to alternate the functional aspects of the muscle if you're going to optimize this higher training frequency. And I'm trying to think of anything else on that topic. Anything else you want to add to that?
I think just if you are going to focus on one or two muscles in specific, you don't even have to change your schedule at all. Just add those isolation movements to your other workouts.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So say, you normally do a Monday through Friday split. Keep that same split, but you want to focus on calves and glutes, let's say. Just add your calves, superset that stuff in your other workouts. Same thing with your glutes, superset that stuff in. You maybe spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes at the gym and you're done. And you didn't have to change, because a lot of people, job, work, relationships, whatever, it's hard to change your schedule at the gym. So I get that part. If you have those specific muscles you're working on, just take your pre-existing schedule and toss those in when you can to increase the frequency for them.
Great point.
And that's like when I was doing the biceps thing every day by alternating different efforts, that's really what I was doing. And again, I don't look like it, but it worked for me at the time,
It's a great tool, man. It's a great tool. Yeah. So, okay, that's great stuff. So, Charlie, thank you so much. I appreciate all your insight. I think, guys, overall, I think that you can take these last two podcasts on frequency and really take your game to a new level. And we're super excited for that for you guys. So once again, guys, listen, if you love this material, make sure that you hit subscribe, like this video, share it with your friends, comment below. If you really like it, smack that bell so we can notify you when we have new videos coming out. And if you're interested in learning more and coming on a longer journey with Charlie and I, we'd love to have you join us. Just head over to themusclephd.com and check out our Academy series. And the free training program. And the free training program, right? So thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.